Every year, I try to watch one movie every day of December leading up to Christmas. I've built up a pretty reliable roster of movies that I love to rewatch, and every year I try to add a few new ones to that list. In this pilot episode, I want to gush about one of my favorite Christmas movies, 2019's Let It Snow. I love Let It Snow. Its characters, its setting, its storytelling, and its whole just wonderful vibe. I'm going to tell you all about it, why I love it, and why I think it deserves more respect than most movies in this genre usually get. The usual spoiler warning applies here. I think you'll enjoy this video a lot more if you have seen the film. I'm also going to use Let It Snow as a springboard to talk about world building and realistic fiction, that is, non-genre, real-world settings, and about what, in general, we mean when we talk about Christmas movies. On occasion, throughout this video, I might describe this movie in ways that sound far too important or academic for what it is, and you might feel the impulse to scoff at it, but just get on board. You'll have more fun.
Hey, what's up?
I'm up, thanks. I'm good. Yeah, I'm up good.
Okay. See you downstairs when you found a bra.
First, what defines a Christmas movie? Some of this is pretty obvious stuff. It should take place at or around Christmas time, right? It should express emotional themes that we associate with Christmas, such as generosity, love, family, hope, redemption, and growth. Often this is intermingled with nostalgia, or sometimes a bittersweet or melancholic tone, satisfying a yearning in the viewer for simpler times, escape, small-town life, gratitude for small miracles, that sort of thing. With some obvious exceptions, mostly these are small-scale or low-stakes stories concerned with relationships, character growth, misunderstandings, or scenarios where Christmas Day acts as a kind of ticking clock deadline.
Howard, excuse me, but your wife's cookies are out of this world.
In the Ruritanian tradition, there are tons of Christmas movies that deal with mistaken identity or characters swapping places. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but you might want to note that one down. Ruritanian fiction is going to come up later in a different series. And of course, in Christmas movies, we are going to see a lot of protagonists going through an arc that starts with despair or selfishness and ends with hope or finding joy through giving.
The founder of the feast, indeed!
For my own holiday watching, I like to broaden the scope a little bit. For me, a December movie doesn't need to be set at Christmas to be eligible. My list includes a lot of lonely career guy midlife crisis movies like Lost in Translation, Up in the Air, and A Hologram for the King, which says an embarrassing amount about me. It also includes all ages classics, both live action and animated, and a whole bunch of my favorite romances from the 80s and 90s. So now you know a little bit more about me and what I like to watch at this time of year. Let's talk about Let It Snow. Let It Snow was released in 2019. It was directed by Luke Snellin, and I believe that's his directorial debut. It was written by Laura Solon, Victoria Strauss, and Kay Cannon, based on the young adult novel Let It Snow, 3 Holiday Romances, co-written by Maureen Johnson, Lauren Miracle, and my close personal friend and confidant, John Green. It's what's known as a fix-up novel, a term that I'd never come across before, which means a book comprising several previously written short stories that have been reworked to make something new. In this case, 3 separate short stories set in the same town and around the same time, which makes the movie kind of a fix-up of a fix-up. Yet another evolution of this story where the screenwriters have added even more, connecting the stories in new ways, which from my perspective, being concerned with how stories are told, is really interesting. Let It Snow is a slice-of-life Christmas rom-com that takes place over the course of a single day, Christmas Eve, and it follows several interweaving narratives. Julie has a chance encounter with world-famous pop star Stuart, who quickly gets to know her life and meet her family. Dory coaches Addie through a stressful holiday time while she obsesses over a boyfriend who doesn't seem to care about her, and at the same time wrestles with a new relationship involving Kerry. Tobin and Angie, aka the Duke, have been best friends since they were children, but Tobin is secretly in love with her. And Keon just wants to throw a party. Its huge ensemble cast includes Isabella Merced, Shamik Moore, Odeya Rush, Liv Hewson, Mitchell Hope, Kiernan Shipka, Matthew Noshka, Jacob Batalon, Anna Akana, and Joan Cusack. It's got sledding, a car chase, a tiny little pig, and it comes in at a runtime of just 92 minutes.
It's DJ, K-Star, Pow Money. It's so obvious.
It looks like a text that a baby would send.
First up, I think Let It Snow has some really wonderful characters, supported by some really excellent performances. For the most part, our principal characters are highly likable, and their chemistry is never in question. I think as unlikable as her character is for most of the film, Odeya Rush does a fantastic job as Addie. I love Mitchell Hope in the role of Tobin. I think Matthew Noshka is effortlessly funny as JP, and it's always fun to see Joan Cusack being weird, whilst at the same time her character is taking a back seat and letting our young cast take center stage. And almost everything else I'm going to say in this video hinges on the fact that we like and believe these characters. Let It Snow also looks good. It's a really good looking movie. This subgenre is not usually praised for its visual quality, and here's a movie that looks really, really good throughout. And although it takes place in a limited number of locations that we're kind of constantly going back to throughout the day, it squeezes so many dynamic shots out of them. One of the defining strengths of Let It Snow is its tag-yourself intertwined storytelling. It's somewhat an anthology-style film with all these stories more or less sharing the screen time equally, which means that if you're not particularly invested in, for instance, Dory and Kerry, it shouldn't get too much in the way of your rooting for Angie and Tobin. I also think when this kind of film is done well, it gives it a lot of rewatch value. On a rewatch, you might enjoy a different storyline more, or you might notice something that resonates with you now, a few years later, that didn't the first time. This is another thing that I think is going to come up a lot on this channel, which is that we bring our life experience to a piece of art. We always bring what is happening in our own lives to the movies that we watch. So today, you might be Kerry or Addie, but next year, 2 years from now, you might be Angie or Julie or Stuart. These interconnected storylines, whilst being very familiar, are also really varied. And I think that they're told and then brought together in a way that feels natural. One of the reasons the stories in this movie really work is because they're thematically linked in a really deep way. At least on the surface, we know these stories. A boy being secretly in love with his best friend, a love triangle, a painful breakup forcing a character to deal with issues of self-worth, a young woman trying to make the right choice about her future. We know all this, we've seen it. But on closer inspection, I think there is a wonderfully simple framework that connects them all together. Okay, bear with me. Let It Snow is a movie where expectations and assumptions drive the conflict. Stuart lives the life of a celebrity where the public at large have preconceived notions of who he is. Julie assumes all kinds of things about him, even while claiming not to care that he's famous. Tobin assumes that JP is trying to romance the Duke. And we, the audience, agree, right? The movie plays on our expectations. We see JP and we think he's going to fit into this recognizable archetype, and then he doesn't. Tobin and the Duke make assumptions about each other that need to be dispelled, while Dory and Kerry are doing the same thing, with Dory assuming Kerry is out, and Kerry assuming that because Dory is already out, her life in that regard is much easier. Even Keon, the guy in the chair himself, whose whole plot is just that he wants to throw a great party and be noticed by a semi-famous DJ, by the end, learns to let go of his expectations. This point is perfectly represented by two characters, the identical Reston brothers. We're introduced to these characters as like scary, dangerous criminals, but we're not actually given any evidence. It's just like a rumor that our characters have heard.
The Reston brothers? I thought they went to jail.
No, I think the witness had a change of heart.
And when Tobin finally comes face to face with them after being pursued all day, it turns out maybe they weren't that dangerous to begin with. Literally, every principal character in this movie makes assumptions or holds ill-conceived expectations that by the end have melted away. Nobody's life is ever really in danger. There's nothing remotely stretching outside of the confines of this little town, this little Waffle House, and this bunch of characters. But the way in which conflict is both heightened and diffused is expert. We can all remember what it's like to be a teenager and for these small issues to feel like they're the most important things in the world, and this movie creates that atmosphere really well. In my opinion, it also does an amazing job snuffing them out, one by one, as our different story strands are concluded. Secrets are revealed, and it's not the end of the world. Characters communicate, and it doesn't ruin their friendships. And when finally confronted with the dangerous criminal bullies who've been chasing you for hours, maybe they're just human beings.
This guy is crazy, man. That's what I'm talking about. Wearing a weird-ass costume, yelling about raccoons and shit.
My last point, I want to talk about the world building that happens in Let It Snow. And world building is not a term that we often use when describing rom-coms, but I think we should. It doesn't just exist in sci-fi and fantasy. World building is about all of the little connections and details that go into making a fictional world feel real. Characters clearly have lives outside of the events of this film. They have a past and they have family and relationships with each other. They have relationships with people who are off camera, right? Which might sound like a small thing, but it isn't. There is a thing that happens a couple of times in this movie where characters make jokes about other characters we will never see.
Janet.
She's going through a really rough time right now.
Dirty-ass Janet. Has her car stuck in the driveway? Snowed in? That's so
Selfish.
Thank you.
And again, later on in Keon's story, it slowly dawns on him and us that DJ Tempest, a character who has been an important driving force for Keon's narrative, is just not going to appear. And I think that's great. I've seen negative reviews of this film complaining that it tells rather than shows, and wondering what it would be like if it had some flashbacks, particularly for Dory and Kerry, if we could flash back to this night that they talk so much about. But I think that there's a real joy to be had in the filmmaker's commitment to the story only happening inside of this one day. The Reston brothers are another great example of this, as is Joan Cusack's tinfoil hat lady. We never learn her name, we never find out about the tinfoil.
Why do you wear the...
No!
And that's great. That's so good. It reminds me of some of my favorite 80s and 90s rom-coms. When Diane and Lloyd go on their first date in Cameron Crowe's Say Anything, they go to a house party hosted every year by an aging graduate who dresses up as a chicken. It's a detail that doesn't need to be there, just like Jeremy Piven's completely unhinged performance.
Give me my Firebird keys! You must chill! You must chill! I have hidden your keys! Chill!
But it immerses you so effectively in the world of the film. And it's something that, for a lot of reasons that we couldn't possibly cover in this video, many modern films completely fail to achieve. It's by no means a perfect movie, there are things I don't like about it, but that's not what this video is for. When I watch Let It Snow, it feels like returning to a place that I know really, really well. And I think that makes it one of the best modern Christmas movies. Thank you for watching this episode of Something Slightly Different. This is a pilot that I wanted to put out while it was still Christmas time. If you enjoyed this and would like to hear me talk about more of my favorite Christmas movies, let me know in the comments.